This scene introduces a woman named Catherine, who appears to exist in a completely different world. Suddenly, Catherine moves toward a young man named Edward and tries to talk to him, attempting to convince him of something. However, in the next moment, Edward begins transforming into a strange, monstrous creature. The transformation is so terrifying that Catherine is forced to press a button on her wrist to save herself. As soon as she does, she teleports back to her real world, Earth. When she opens her eyes, she finds Edward's body lying next to her. At this point, it is revealed that Catherine is a psychologist who uses highly advanced neurological techniques to bring people in comas back to the real world. Edward, it turns out, has been in a coma, and Catherine has been trying to retrieve his consciousness for months. However, despite their efforts, they haven't seen any results. To maintain this technology, two doctors, Henry and Kate, are working with her. They operate on a small scale to avoid any major risks. Soon, Edward's father arrives. He is a wealthy investor who has funded the entire project, but he is beginning to doubt whether his son's treatment is actually possible. Considering his son's condition, he contemplates moving him elsewhere for treatment. However, Henry and Kate plead for more time. After much persuasion, Edward's father agrees and provides additional funding, which means Catherine and her team must now work quickly and effectively. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a man named Carl, who is seen heading toward a deserted area. It is later revealed that Carl has kidnapped a girl and is torturing her in disturbing ways. His rage toward the girl reaches such an extreme level that he ultimately kills her. But that's not all. Carl then begins torturing himself as if he is enjoying it. This makes it clear that he is a psychopath. After murdering the girl, he dumps her body into the nearby ocean and drives away. Soon after, police officers arrive at the crime scene. During their investigation, the police officers discovered the girl's dead body floating in the water. Upon further examination of the crime scene, they found evidence suggesting that the killer had a dog with him at the time of the murder. The head of the investigation, a police officer named Peter, immediately ordered all evidence to be sent to the laboratory for analysis. Something about this case seemed off to him. It didn't appear to be the work of an ordinary criminal. The way the victim had been tortured before being killed indicated that they were dealing with a cunning and sadistic murderer. Meanwhile, a girl named Julia was shown sitting alone, seemingly waiting for someone. Not far from her, Carl was watching her closely. Julia was actually Carl's ex-girlfriend, and even though she had moved on and was in a relationship with someone else, Carl still obsessively kept an eye on her from a distance. Later that evening, after finishing her work, Julia got into her car in the parking area. Just as she was about to leave, a dog suddenly ran in front of her car and collided with it. Being kind-hearted, Julia immediately got out to check on the animal. However, before she could react, Carl appeared from behind and attacked her, knocking her unconscious and taking her with him. It was soon revealed that the dog wasn't injured at all. It actually belonged to Carl, and the entire incident had been part of his carefully planned trap. The police soon learned about another kidnapping and suspected that the same killer who murdered the previous girl was behind it. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Peter announced to his entire team that they had to catch the killer as soon as possible, otherwise, more lives would be lost. Meanwhile, Peter's seniors started pressuring him, warning that if he couldn't solve the case soon, he would be removed from the investigation. Determined not to let that happen, Peter made this case his top priority and personally took charge of tracking down the murderer. To gather more information about Julia, Peter decided to question her parents. During the conversation, Julia's parents showed him a photo of her with her boyfriend. To Peter's shock, the man in the picture was none other than Carl. As soon as Peter learned about Carl's connection to Julia, he immediately mobilized his entire police force to track him down. Meanwhile, Carl was shown sitting in his bathtub at home. For some unknown reason, he had an intense obsession with being in the water. It seemed that a critical condition had pushed him further into his psychotic state. As his instability worsened, Carl went to take a dose of a strange drug he relied on, but to his horror, he realized he had run out of it. Desperate and in agony, Carl frantically searched for more doses, but they were completely gone. Overcome by withdrawal symptoms, he collapsed and lost consciousness. Shortly after, Peter and his team arrived at Carl's house. As they entered, they found him lying unconscious. Wasting no time, they took him into custody and arranged for immediate medical treatment. Meanwhile, the rest of the police officers stayed behind to search his house for further evidence. What they discovered was beyond disturbing. Carl's home was filled with strange and unsettling objects. But the most horrifying discovery was made in the basement. Several videotapes were found, each containing footage of Carl abducting, torturing, and murdering different women. One particularly chilling video showed him trapping a girl inside a glass chamber and slowly reducing her oxygen supply, suffocating her to death. The officers were horrified. These findings confirmed without a doubt that Carl was the serial killer they had been hunting. All the evidence was immediately sent to Peter, who now had solid proof of Carl's crimes. However, the biggest challenge remained: Carl was still unconscious. He was rushed to a doctor, who began a thorough examination to determine what had caused his condition. After hours of testing and analysis, the doctor finally reached a conclusion. The doctor called Peter and his team to deliver a shocking revelation: the man they had captured, Carl, was suffering from a severe neurological disorder. This condition made it impossible for him to control his actions, causing a violent and aggressive personality to emerge. In essence, Carl was currently in a coma, and his chances of regaining consciousness were extremely low. This news left Peter and his team deeply concerned because Carl was the only person who knew where Julia was being held. There was still no sign of her, meaning she could still be alive but trapped somewhere. That made waking Carl up an urgent priority. However, the doctor was clear: bringing a comatose patient back to reality was incredibly difficult. But he did know of an advanced neurological technique that could help. He mentioned a private organization run by Catherine and her team, who specialized in entering people's minds to bring them back to the real world. With no other options left, Peter and his team reached out to Catherine's organization. They presented the case to Catherine, Kate, and Henry, explaining everything about Carl, how his neurological disease had turned him into a serial killer and how he was now in a deep coma. The police department needed their help to bring Carl back so they could find out where Julia was. At first, Catherine was hesitant. The case seemed too complicated, and she wasn't sure if her team could handle it. But after being offered a substantial amount of money, she eventually agreed to take on the challenge. However, before proceeding, Catherine laid down one condition. She told Peter that if they succeeded in waking Carl up, the police couldn't harm him. Since his actions were a result of his illness, he shouldn't be punished as an ordinary criminal. Catherine made it clear to Peter: Carl had no personal motive for his killings, his actions were purely due to his neurological illness. Therefore, once he was cured, they had to let him go. Peter hesitated but eventually agreed under one condition: if Carl gave them Julia's location, she was found safe, and Carl promised never to kill again, they would release him. Satisfied with the deal, Catherine and her team initiated their advanced neurological process. Within moments, Catherine successfully connected to Carl's mind, transporting her into a strange, surreal world, his coma-induced mental state. Inside this world, Catherine witnessed an unsettling scene: a group of people drowning a small child in water. Upon closer look, she realized the child was Carl in his childhood form. Catherine, now fully immersed in Carl's subconscious, became aware of her surroundings and started moving forward. She saw young Carl climbing a staircase and instinctively followed him, hoping to communicate. As she navigated through this mental landscape, she found herself inside a chamber where Carl stood next to a large horse. She tried speaking to him, but instead of responding, Carl suddenly backed away. Catherine sensed hesitation, even fear, in his demeanor. Just as she was about to reach out, Carl suddenly pushed her backward. The force of the push caused sharp glass shards to rain down onto the horse's body, slicing it into multiple pieces. The horse collapsed, lifeless. At that moment, Catherine had a realization: Carl wasn't inherently evil. He had pushed her to protect her from the falling glass. Before she could process further, Carl's childlike form bolted away, running upstairs. Determined to get answers, Catherine pursued him. As she continued deeper into his subconscious, she stumbled upon a horrifying sight: multiple chambers, each containing a different woman. These were the same women Carl had abducted and tortured to death. Catherine had to get to the root of this case, so she opened the door to a chamber. As soon as she did, a strange-looking woman emerged and attacked Catherine, knocking her unconscious. The woman then dragged Catherine to another location. Inside, there was a throne, and sitting on it was a mysterious and sinister-looking man with dark powers. Soon, it became clear that this was none other than Carl's evil persona, the dark side of him that forced him to commit terrible acts. Every person has such a side in their mind, one that thinks negatively and wishes harm upon others. The strange woman placed Catherine in front of Carl's demonic form. The evil entity was furious and charged toward Catherine, trying to kill her. Terrified, Catherine quickly pressed a button on her hand. Within moments, she traveled back into her human form, barely escaping death. If she had died in the coma world, she would have been trapped there forever. Now, she had to find another way to destroy this evil force. Meanwhile, Julia was shown trapped inside a chamber where Carl had locked her. Suddenly, water began filling the glass chamber, and in just a short time, Julia was going to drown. She screamed and struggled, but there was no one to save her. Her death seemed inevitable. At the same time, Peter was shown rushing to Catherine, bombarding her with questions about what she saw inside Carl's mind. Catherine explained that she had encountered a terrifying king-like figure. Based on her study, she realized that this king was none other than Carl's evil personality, the very force that was compelling him to commit those brutal murders. Catherine was unsure how to deal with it and how to separate it from Carl's mind. But Peter, trying to motivate her, reminded her that she had solved many difficult cases before. He was reassuring her that she would solve it. Catherine then gathered her courage and went back into Edward's mind. This time, she brought Carl's white dog along, thinking it might help her discover something in the Coma world. When Catherine opened her eyes in that world, it felt like she was falling from above, as if someone was trying to kill her. After a moment, Carl's dog appeared and saved her, guiding her toward a house. Catherine followed and entered, where she saw a younger version of Carl. His childhood form looked very sad, washing dishes. Catherine asked him many questions, but he didn't answer. Suddenly, a dish broke, and Carl's younger self told Catherine to hide because his father was about to arrive. While hiding, Catherine observed the situation and realized how much Carl's father had tormented him. For even the smallest mistake, Carl, as a child, was beaten severely. Carl's mother was also paralyzed and couldn't communicate with her husband, leaving Carl to endure the abuse alone. His childhood was terrifying, with his father constantly tormenting him. As Catherine moved forward, she came across Carl's adult form, his real personality. However, this version of Carl had already killed a girl and locked her body in a bathtub. Catherine asked Carl why he was doing this. He simply explained that he had been tortured since childhood, and his father was the one who had inflicted the pain. Carl's father used to lock him in the bathtub and beat him mercilessly. These traumatic experiences likely caused Carl's mind to break, turning him into a killer. Soon, the adult Carl left, but then the evil version of Carl appeared. He attacked Catherine, attempting to kill her. Now, the evil version of Carl put a metal collar around Catherine's neck, trapping her in place. She was now under his control. Meanwhile, in the real world, Henry and Kate noticed some strange changes in Catherine's brain signals. These changes were unusual, prompting them to think that Catherine should be brought back. But before they could act, Catherine's signals from the other world completely broke down. This meant that Catherine was now permanently trapped in the Coma world, and if she wasn't brought back, Carl would remain stuck there as well. Peter had to solve this case at any cost, so after much thought, he decided that he would enter Catherine's mind and bring her back. Henry and Kate tried to convince Peter not to do it, but he was determined. After carefully following all the procedures, Peter was transferred into the Coma world, into Catherine's mind. This was Peter's first time exploring such a world, one that exists within a person's brain. There were strange things around, but Peter couldn't see anything at first. As he moved forward, Peter encountered a younger version of Carl, who began guiding him. Following the directions, Peter reached a place where he found Catherine. She was sitting on a bed in a seductive posture, her face covered with a mask. Peter thought he could bring her to consciousness by removing the mask. However, it turned out that Catherine was under Carl's control, so her behavior had completely changed. She purposefully moved closer to Peter, trying to distract him. Peter tried to stop her, but Catherine continued to get closer. It was then revealed that all of this was the work of the evil Carl, who was manipulating Catherine's mind and trapping Peter in the process. Peter was caught from behind by the evil version of Carl. Despite all of Peter's efforts, he couldn't defeat the evil entity, especially since the powers of the evil Carl had grown much stronger in this world. The evil Carl put Peter to sleep and started viciously cutting him in the abdomen. Peter screamed at Catherine to wake up, pleading with her as a friend. Gradually, Catherine's behavior began to change, signaling that she had broken free from the evil Carl's control and was regaining her senses. To save Peter, Catherine quickly grabbed a knife and stabbed the evil Carl in the back. This gave them both a brief moment of escape from the evil Carl, but they were still trapped in the Coma world. Catherine and Peter moved to another chamber where many girls were trapped, reflecting the real-life victims Carl had tortured and killed. As they moved further, Catherine encountered a young version of Carl, who appeared frightened. Catherine approached him and assured him that she would save him, telling him that he didn't need to be afraid. But she also needed him to provide some information. She asked him what he was truly afraid of and why he didn't want to return. The young Carl, unable to speak, clung to Catherine, and as she placed her hand on his back, she noticed blood, realizing that the evil Carl and the young Carl were the same person, only with different forms at different times. Understanding this, Catherine knew she had to free Carl, as he wasn't a bad person by nature. The situation and his past experiences had shaped him into what he had become. Peter, however, was only focused on bringing Catherine back, and when he realized that Carl's different personalities were one and the same, he tried to force Catherine to leave. Catherine, however, refused to leave and wanted to help Carl, but Peter insisted. He pressed the button on her hand, and shortly after, Kate and Henry included their coordinates to help bring them back. Here, Peter and Catherine return to their bodies. Once they are transferred back, Peter quickly gets up and, along with his soldiers, sets off to find Julia's location. It seems that Peter has gained some idea from the Coma world that might help him find her. Meanwhile, inside the Institute, Catherine is deeply distressed. She wants to save Carl at any cost, so without permission, she returns to the Coma world. Catherine heads straight to the young version of Carl and starts explaining to him that she can save him. Carl, looking dejected, responds that he wants to return to the real world and doesn't want to stay trapped in this world full of darkness. To Carl, Catherine appears as an angel who has come to save him. They embrace and share their thoughts, and it becomes clear that Carl, as he grows, has spent his entire childhood in trauma and loneliness. All he ever needed was someone to share his pain with. His father tortured him relentlessly, and on top of that, his poverty never seemed to end. After so many bad experiences, it's no wonder Carl's mind became unstable. Catherine understands all of this and is determined to get Carl out of this place. But just then, darkness starts to fall around them, signaling the entry of the evil Carl. The evil Carl is now more powerful, his dark energy growing stronger, and he advances quickly, ready to attack both the young Carl and Catherine. However, Catherine doesn't hesitate this time. She draws her bow and arrow and targets the evil Carl's legs, noticing that his speed is a major threat. If she can injure his legs, he won't be able to move as fast. Catherine's strategy works, and the evil Carl collapses to the ground. Catherine had infused a lot of stamina into her body, but since this was the Coma world and not the real world, she could create many things using her imagination. She fought the evil version of Carl with all her might until he was paralyzed. Finally, she drew a sword and struck down the evil Carl. As soon as the evil Carl died, the younger, real Carl also perished. Catherine then took the dead body of the young Carl and placed it in holy water, as Carl had a deep connection with water. It was his wish to be laid to rest in water with honor. Catherine fulfilled his wishes, using her mind to eliminate the burden of the evil forces that had driven Carl to commit bad deeds. In the real world, Peter followed the coordinates and arrived at a basement. Inside, he found Julia locked in a glass chamber, filled with water, and she was close to drowning. Julia tried to breathe through a pipe above her, but she was running out of time. Peter immediately picked up an iron rod and smashed the glass, letting the water drain out, rescuing Julia just in time. Had he been any slower, Julia would have died. The reason Peter found Julia in the basement was that during his time in the Coma world, he had seen a girl trapped inside a chamber, with the name of a strange company written on a mirror. This company was connected to the real world. Peter had started investigating all these chambers in the real world, searching for products related to this company and where they were being applied. In the end, Peter managed to save Julia. The next day, we see Peter and Catherine meeting each other. Because both of them were happy that they succeeded in their mission. Catherine had saved Carl, and now Carl was living a good life. According to the terms, Peter and all his officers had released Carl, and as long as he remained normal, he wouldn't face any issues. They met each other and then went their separate ways. Catherine was then shown back in the Coma world, this time inside the mind of the starting child, Edward. This time, Catherine knew how to handle such critical cases, so she went and spoke with Edward, trying to eliminate the evil inside him. The way Catherine had handled Carl's case, she was now very close to helping Edward as well. Edward's father was very happy to see this progress and decided to invest further in this industry and technology, ensuring that it would be used on a global level. And that's how our adventurous story ends.